Welcome to the Hymn of Ash and Echo. Tonight's story is 600 Feet Above Hell, a descent into survival, terror, and the undead from the collapse. If this video hits 70 likes, part 2 drops tomorrow. A new part will release each day we hit the like goal. Brace yourself. 600 feet above hell. By the time the first man bit the second, Eddie had mustard on his chin and half a bacon, egg, and cheese in his hand. It was a Thursday, which meant the coffee cart guy downstairs had overcooked the eggs, but nailed the bacon, which meant Eddie was in a good mood, and that alone made Marco's day a whole lot better. 600 feet below, New York thrummed the way it always had. A constant low-frequency argument of engines, horns, voices, and distant sirens that blended into background noise. Up here, on the little metal balcony outside the tower crane cabin, it was almost peaceful. Almost. Luis leaned against the safety rail, one boot hooked under a bar, scrolling on his phone with the casual recklessness of a man who'd never dropped anything from height. His music leaked out of cheap earbuds, thin, tinny hi-hats, a bass line that sounded more like insects than instruments. The wind tugged at his orange vest. Inside the cabin, Marco sat in the operator's chair, thermos between his hands, staring at the skyline like he always did during lunch. He didn't check his phone, didn't listen to music, didn't talk much if he didn't have to. He just watched. After 30 years in iron, his eyes could read cranes and cores and workers across blocks. The city was just another job site to him, stitched together with steel and stress. The crane moaned as it rocked in the breeze. Marco felt it in his ribs and calves, not as danger, just as weather. "Yo," Luis said suddenly. "You guys see this?" Eddie took another bite. "If it's about the Knicks, I'm jumping." "Well, not the Knicks." Luis frowned down at the screen. "The Bronx is going nuts. Like, for real nuts." Marco half turned. "Riots?" "They're saying, I don't know." Luis squinted. "People biting each other. Look at this." He held the phone out. Eddie didn't move. Grease ran down his fingers, warm and familiar. Riots were a thing that happened to other people, on other lines, on other days. Somebody always biting somebody," Eddie said with his mouth full. "You seen the subway? This is different." Luis's voice was thin enough that Marco pushed himself out of the chair and stepped out onto the tiny deck. Wind slapped his cheeks, salty with whatever blew in off the East River. He took the phone. The video was shakier than most. Someone filming from a third-floor window, looking down at a crosswalk somewhere uptown. People running, some falling. 2 men on top of someone on the pavement. At first, Marco thought it was a fight. Then he saw the way one of them moved. Not punching, not kicking. His head snapped, animal fast, and came back red. The clip cut off. The post underneath had a string of laughing emojis. A zombie gif. Luis snatched the phone back and scrolled. Everybody's saying it's fake, but there's like 50 clips now. Hospitals, subway, downtown. "It's always fake until it isn't," Marco muttered. Another siren wailed up from below. Not odd by itself, but it didn't fade. Another joined it, then another. It turned into a braid of rising wails. Eddie finished his sandwich and licked his thumb. Cops probably doing one of those live shooter drills again. Remember last year? Whole block shut down for 6 hours. He said it like it was a nuisance. Not a memory of 4 men with rifles sweeping the lobby while they waited with their hard hats in their hands. Luis still stared at the screen. "It's not a drill, man." The radio clipped inside the cabin crackled. "All site personnel clear the street level. Repeat. All trades stand by in place until further." The foreman's voice cut into static. Marco stepped into the cabin. "Luke, you breaking up. Say again." "Nothing, just hiss." He tried the backup channel. Still nothing. Below, something changed. It took Marco a few seconds to put his finger on it. The city noise was still there, but the pattern warped. Horns leaned on instead of tapping. The sirens bled together into a constant animal howl. There were more shouts, too, and not the cussing kind. High, sharp sounds that sliced the air and made his shoulders rise. He put the radio back slowly. "Guys," Luis said. Marco joined him at the window. From up here, Midtown looked like a model city. All angles and colors and tiny moving dots. The afternoon sun washed everything in that old photograph gold. The kind that made even trash look sentimental. Tiny people were running. From this high, you couldn't see faces, just the way bodies moved. They weren't dodging cabs or rushing lights. They were sprinting. Some zigzagged, some fell. The pattern of pedestrians scattered like spilled beads. One of the tiny shapes veered, slammed into another. Both tumbled. A third joined. The mess stayed on the ground, jerking. "You see," Luis whispered. Marco saw. Another siren died mid-wail. The hair on his arms stood up. He'd worked through blackouts, thunderstorms, a hurricane that took coffee cups and scaffolding off a high-rise like God brushing crumbs off a table. He'd seen men fall. He'd watched a guy bleed out on the 15th floor, half his skull missing. This felt different. "Look there," Eddie said. The man's finger shook as he pointed. 3 blocks over, on a mid-rise roof, a building engineer or janitor or something, blue work shirt, yellow hard hat, burst out of a door. Even from this distance, Marco could see the way the guy was moving. That all-out, desperate run that had no energy left for looking cool. He cleared 10 yards before he stumbled, caught himself on an AC unit, and yanked a radio off his belt. He shouted into it, shoulders hunched. The door banged open behind him. 2 people came out. People. Marco's brain insisted on the word even as his gut recoiled. They moved wrong. Too fast, too direct. Like puppets pulled by a single string from the spine. They hit the man from behind. He went down under them like a folding chair. "Jesus," Eddie breathed. The man fought. Marco saw his boots kick, his hard hat rolling away. The 2 on top of him jerked, heads dipping in short, savage strokes. They weren't punching. They weren't wrestling. The engineer went still. For a second, nothing moved except the wind. Then the body under them twitched. Once, twice. His back arched off the rooftop as if yanked by a crane. Marco could see it even from here, clear as if he was standing 10 feet away. Slowly the man rolled, got to his knees, got to his feet. He stood there, trembling. His head tilted too far, chin almost touching his chest. His hands hung useless at his sides. Then his head snapped up. His eyes found something Marco couldn't see. Off the roof, somewhere below, and he ran. Not before, no, he moved, like the others, running directly off the roof. Luis took a step back. His heel almost slipped off the grate. Marco grabbed his vest and yanked him in. "Easy," he said. His voice sounded calm, despite the horror he felt. Luis's face had gone bone white. "It's them," he said. "Who?" "Zombies." Eddie snorted without humor. "You for real right now, kid?" Luis dragged a hand across his face. "I've seen every movie, every show, played all the games. That..." He jabbed a finger at the glass, at the tiny jerking figures on the roof. "That's it. That's exactly it. The sprint, the twitch, the bite. This is like World War Z meets 28 days. Enough." Marco didn't raise his voice, but they both stopped. "Whatever it is, it's happening. We can call it zombies later." He looked around the cabin like the walls would offer an answer. They didn't. They just hummed quietly with the last vibrations of the swinging boom. They were 600 feet up in the air, tied to a building that was more open steel than structure, with one fixed ladder down the tower, one small windowed cabin, and 2 toolboxes worth of gear. He could feel the decision crystallizing in the space behind his eyes. the part of him that had calculated load limits and swing angles and wind speeds for half his life. Luis swallowed. "We're safe up here, right?" "For now," Marco said. "For now?" Eddie repeated. "You got food?" Marco asked. They looked at each other. Eddie held up the balled foil from his sandwich. Luis patted empty pockets. There's the break room," Eddie offered. "Trailer on level 10. If the guys left anything," Marco said. "And that's if we get down that far." The water cooler was on the ground. So was the street access. So was the stair tower. So was the rest of the crew, assuming any of them were still breathing. Wind whistled through the lattice. On the street, a car jumped the curb, plowed into two running figures, and crunched against a light pole. Smoke began to curl from under the hood. One of the two on the pavement twitched, then sat up like a puppet, body folding straight from flat back to seated with no in-between. Luis made a small, strangled sound. "Okay," Marco said, mostly to himself. "Okay." He moved. He stepped back into the cabin and started opening drawers. Wrenches, screwdrivers, a roll of tape, chipped coffee mugs, stained gloves, old safety paperwork nobody read. "What are you doing?" Eddie asked. "Inventory." Marco found a short pry bar, weighed it, and set it on the console. "We got no food or water up here. If something happens to the stairs or the core, we're stuck on this crane until we dry out or fall off." "So we climb down now?" Luis asked. His voice rose on the last word. Marco looked out the window. The streets were getting worse. Clusters, then clumps, then rivers of bodies. Normal people running, not normal ones chasing. The difference between them sharpened with each block. Normal people looked behind them. Normal people dodged around obstacles. The others smashed into everything, bounced, and kept going. "Not now," Marco said. "We move out there in the open with that." He gestured at the swarm. "We're dead in 10 minutes. So what then?" Eddie's jaw muscles flexed. "We starve nice and safe?" Marco opened the emergency locker under the seat. Flare gun, 1 flare. First aid kit. A vacuum-sealed brick of crackers he'd forgotten about. Expiration date last year. He held the crackers up. "We split this." "That's nothing," Luis said. "It's something." He dropped them on the little shelf by the back wall. He saw the question in both their eyes and answered before they asked it. "We fortify," he said. "Fortify what?" Eddie asked. "The cabin, the deck, ourselves." Luis blinked. Like a base. In a game. Marco nodded once. "Exactly like that. Except if we screw up, there's no respawn." They moved the way ironworkers always did when work mattered. Fast, quiet, speaking in half sentences and nods. There was material everywhere if you knew how to look. The crane was bolted to the building core. 6 levels of open deck and bracing below them. Scaff, plywood formwork, rebar bundles, tarps, wire, pallets. The site was a mess on a good day. Today, it was salvation. Marco hooked his safety lanyard to the line and started down the ladder. The wind pushed at his back. He didn't look at the street again. The ground was too far away to help. 3 points of contact, he muttered automatically, hand over hand, boot over boot. "Don't get fancy." Eddie came after him. Luis followed, clipped on, breathing hard enough Marco could hear him over the wind. They descended 2 levels and stepped onto a grating platform welded to the mast. The building core loomed next to them, a honeycomb of concrete and steel with raw openings where windows would one day go. Not today. Marco scanned the floor. Nobody. The usual clutter remained. Stacks of gypsum board, bundles of studs, a half-emptied pallet of cinder blocks. Somebody had left a coffee in a thermos on an upturned bucket. It sat there like an accusation. "Grab what we can carry," Marco said. "Light, useful, and tie-downs. We don't want anything heavy enough to yank us off the ladder. He snagged a coil of tie wire and slung it over his shoulder. Eddie grabbed a handful of 2x4s, ripped from a pallet edge. Luis found a bundle of zip ties and 2 rolls of duct tape, holding them like treasure. Check the electrical cage, Marco added. Luis jogged over to the metal mesh closet where they kept cord reels and temp lights. It was padlocked. He stared at it for half a beat, then back at Marco. Marco pulled a flat bar from his belt. 2 quick hits on the hasp, and it popped. Inside, neatly coiled extension cords, a bin of gloves, 3 more rolls of tape, and a dusty, hard plastic case with first aid stenciled on it. Luis hesitated only a second before he grabbed everything he could cradle to his chest. "This is exactly how a loot room looks," he muttered. "Move," Marco said. They ferried it all back up. It took 3 trips. Each time they climbed, the sounds from below grew wilder. Sirens cutting in and out, screams rising, then falling off a cliff, followed by nothing. Once, a gunshot cracked up between the high-rises, then another, then a whole stuttering string. On the last trip, Marco paused halfway up the ladder and dared a look. Half the block below was clogged with bodies. Some lay still. Most moved. A few cars smoldered. One burned outright, black smoke fingering up past their level. Where people normally queued at the food cart, there was just a knot of writhing gray, red, and movement. He climbed faster. They turned the cabin into a box inside a box. They unbolted spare grating panels and used them like armor, wiring them over the windows from the outside so that anything hitting the glass would find steel first. They ripped planks off pallets and screwed them horizontally across the outer walls, like an old Western fort, only 30 stories up. Eddie found a half-used pail of fireproofing cement, and they slapped it into gaps like mortar. Luis taped plastic over every vent, every seam that looked like it might whisper outside air in. "If it's zombies, it's a virus," he said under his breath, half panicked. "They always bite, but it's still a virus. We keep air clean, we stay clear." Eddie gave him a look. "You realize this virus just took a chunk out of like 20 people in 10 minutes, right? Pretty sure a hefty bag ain't." Luis taped harder. "Luis, if it was in the air, we'd already be screwed," Marco said. Luis hesitated for half a second, then slapped another strip of tape on anyway. Inside, they rearranged everything. The operator chair, normally facing forward, got pushed aside. Toolboxes turned into barricades in front of the door. The little fridge, empty, became extra wall if they had to shove it. Marco opened his personal locker, just a steel cabinet he'd bolted behind the seat, and dumped it out. Old sweatshirt, spare socks, a ridiculous Santa hat from the foreman last year, 2 half-full jars of instant coffee. He set the coffee carefully on the shelf. "Score," Eddie said. "At least we'll die caffeinated." "Nobody dies yet," Marco said. He laid out what they had. 3 decent-sized wrenches, 1 pry bar, a hammer with a fiberglass handle, 2 utility knives with extra blades, a box cutter, and a fistful of rebar tie wire. Eddie added a 3-foot piece of rebar he'd grabbed, one end already bent into a crude hook. Luis produced a folding pocket knife. "That's it?" Luis asked. "That's plenty," Marco said. "We're not soldiers. We're not going hunting." "Yeah, we're the ones who get hunted," Eddie muttered. Marco ignored that. He looked at their bodies, at their clothes. Denim, polyester, cheap vests, skin everywhere. Soft. Luis must have tracked his gaze, because he snapped his fingers once. "Armor," Marco arched an eyebrow. In games, they always slap armor together. Magazine stacks, duct tape, sports pads, whatever. "We got pads. We got tape." He almost sounded excited about something for the first time in an hour. We can make ourselves harder to chew on. Eddie made a face. Don't say chew, but he helped. They raided every gang box on the deck below for knee pads, old harnesses, high-vis jackets, whatever they could reach without going into the open core. Marco cut scrap carpet into strips and taped it around his forearms, over his flannel, then added a layer of cardboard from a pallet wrap. Eddie wrapped duct tape around his shins over his jeans, reinforcing it with old nylon straps from a busted safety harness. Luis went further. He duct taped his hard hat down with a crisscross of straps under his chin, then taped his hoodie up over it. He slotted folded gloves under the hoodie at his neck and taped those too. He looked like a kid's drawing of a riot cop. Eddie snorted. You look like a burrito, man. Yeah, I'll be the burrito that doesn't get bitten, Luis said, though his eyes wobbled a little when he laughed. Marco layered his own gear slower, more methodical. Padded vest, extra thick Carhartt jacket he kept for cold days. Then he slid bits of corrugated plastic between layers, tied them in place with wire. It felt ridiculous until he imagined teeth hitting his forearm. Ridiculous was better than dead. By the time they finished, sweat slicked the insides of their shirts, and their movements had turned heavier. But the thin exposed feeling had eased. Night crept up on them without anyone officially announcing it. The city lights normally clicked on in stages, office tower by office tower, an intricate choreography of timers. Today, most came on, but some didn't. One whole block stayed dark except for fires. Smoke thickened and smeared the horizon. Helicopters crossed the sky less and less often. The three of them sat in their armored box, sharing the stale crackers. Luis did the math. So that's what? Like 3 crackers each now and 3 later? 4 now, Eddie said. If we die, I don't want to die half hungry. You ain't dying, Luis said. Nobody reached for the last piece. Marco eventually broke it into 3 with a thumb and gave them each one. They chewed in silence. The first gunshot that sounded close enough to rattle the glass came from somewhere in their own building. Or maybe the one next to it. Hard to tell with echoes. Another followed, then a scream, punched off midway through like somebody had yanked the cord. Eddie set his jaw. His face looked older than 35 in the dim cabin light. We can't just sit up here and listen to that. We are sitting up here and listening to that, Luis said softly. We don't even know what floor it's on. And we're 3 guys with a wrench and some duct tape, Marco added. He felt the words like a stone in his chest, hating them even as he said them. Doing nothing was almost as bad as doing something stupid, but doing something stupid could get them killed, and that would be that. We wait, he said, till it calms, till we know more. If we get sick, if we get hurt, there's nobody coming with a stretcher, you understand? We are what we have. It sounded cold, and it was. But he doubted that warmth and hope had any place in this world. He saw the flare of anger in Eddie's eyes and the hurt in Luis's. But both of them nodded. They split the night into watches. Luis dozed first, wrapped in his hoodie burrito armor on the cabin floor, phone on his chest like a relic. Eddie sat by the door with the rebar hook across his knees. Marco took the window, watching the city blink and convulse below. Hours scraped by in fits. Once, something tall and pale slammed into the window grate hard enough to rattle the cabin. All 3 of them jerked awake. A gull, disoriented by smoke. It flapped away, leaving a greasy streak on the mesh. Sometime after midnight, the shouting faded. The gunshots grew less frequent. The rivers of bodies in the street thinned into streams. Blackout pockets pulsed across the grid like dead teeth in a grin. Marco drank instant coffee cold out of the jar lid and watched the chaos drop a gear. It didn't stop. It just settled. Like the city had realized this was its new normal. Morning came hazy and yellow, filtered through smoke and dust. The light made the cabin feel smaller. Eddie leaned his head against the wall, eyes closed. "So what's the plan, boss?" Marco wanted to say, "I'm not your boss." He was older, sure. He'd been the crane operator since before either of them had finished high school. He'd trained half the current site. People defaulted to looking at him when things went sideways. He still wanted to say it. Instead, he looked at the bottom of his thermos, one last inch of cold coffee, then at the brittle, empty cracker wrapper on the shelf. "We need water," he said. "Food if we can. We stay here without either. We don't make it more than a couple days. We go down stupid. We don't make it more than a couple hours." Luis rubbed his eyes. "Game logic says the building will have loot. Offices, break rooms, vending machines, and fewer enemies than the street. We clear one floor at a time. We're good. Real life says one bad move and we break our necks," Eddie said. "Staying up here is also a bad move." Luis spread his hands. They all knew it. Marco stood. "Okay," he said. "We go. Down the mast, into the core. The trailer on 10 is our first stop. Water cooler, vending machine, whatever's left. If it looks bad before that, we turn back. No hero shit. We're not rescue. We're resupply." He said it for them and for himself. He checked their weapons again. Pry bar for him, rebar hook for Eddie. Luis took the hammer and one of the big wrenches, sliding them through his belt like an improvised gunfighter. They rigged up one more layer before stepping out. Luis taped utility blades along the forearms of Eddie's jacket, edges pointed outward, then wrapped tape over the handles so they wouldn't cut him unless something pressed hard. Ridiculous, maybe lethal. The kind of thing some designer would put in a survival game. At the ladder, Marco clipped his lanyard with fingers that didn't quite tremble. 3 points, he reminded them. Yeah, Eddie said. "If I fall, you tell my ex she still ain't getting the house." "You don't have a house," Luis said. "Exactly." They started down. The ladder snugged tight inside a square of steel mesh that ran down the mast, bolted every story. It was meant to keep workers from falling outward. It also kept anything from getting in theory. They hit the first landing and froze. Something was banging against the mesh from the outside, just below them. A dull, rhythmic thud, metal on steel. It vibrated up through their boots. Marco looked down. A man in a shredded safety vest slammed his shoulders into the cage. Again. He'd once been big, heavy through the chest. The kind of guy you wanted on a rigging crew. Now his arms hung broken at angles, one wrist flopping uselessly. His head tilted sideways, cheek pressed to the mesh. Skin was missing from half his face. Teeth showed all the time, not from a smile. He smelled them, or heard them, or just sensed motion. His head jerked, locking eyes with Marco in a way that didn't feel human. Then he screamed. It was more like a roar, raw and animal, but the echo made it sound like the shaft itself was angry. He jammed his face into the mesh, snapping his teeth. Blood smeared the steel. Luis sucked air through his teeth. "That is some full-on Left 4 Dead shit." "Later!" Marco snapped. The thing's weight rocked the cage. If it got its hands on the metal right where the ladder bolted in, it could pull a section loose. Open it. If it got through, more could follow. "We can go back up," Eddie said. "And then what?" Nobody answered. The thing below them smashed its head into the mesh again, leaving a wet smear. The ladder cage wasn't built for fighting. There was no room for swings, barely enough for elbow bends. Marco thought through options fast. Climb back up, wait. Hope he wandered. Climb down, try to sneak past while he was banging the wrong way. Kick his fingers until he fell, or remove the threat. "Stay clipped," Marco said. "Luis, back up one rung. Eddie, hold his belt." "What are you doing?" Luis hissed. "Opening the cage." "Hell no. If we leave him, he'll keep banging until more come," Marco said. If he weakens the mesh, we'll have a hole at our backs later. We're doing this on our feet, not theirs. The logic settled in heavy. He slid 2 rungs down and unclipped one hand. Long enough to pull the safety pin out of the hinged access gate halfway between floors. It creaked. The thing clawed at it, fingers vomiting blood as skin tore off against the steel. "Come on then," Marco muttered under his breath. To calm his own fear as much as to taunt, he kicked the gate open. The zombie lurched in. The cage was suddenly too full, a body thrashing, teeth snapping inches from Marco's face. His safety lanyard went taut as he instinctively leaned back. Eddie grabbed his harness and pulled hard, anchoring him. Luis pressed his back flat against the opposite mesh. Hammer raised, but no space to swing. Marco rammed the pry bar up under the thing's chin. It didn't slow. It grabbed the bar, bent its broken fingers around it, used it to haul itself closer. The smell of shit and metal filled the shaft. Marco made a choice. He let go with one hand, ignoring the way his body swayed, and hooked his elbow behind the zombie's neck. He pulled. Their foreheads slammed together. Stars burst behind his eyes. "Move," he grunted. Luis didn't need more invitations. He jabbed the hammer sideways, not swinging, just driving with his whole shoulder like he was trying to wedge a nail into concrete. The claw end found the soft spot under the ear, scraped bone, and sank. The body jerked. Its teeth snapped once, twice, then slackened. The weight doubled. Dead weight was always heavier. Marco and Eddie held it a second longer, then let go together. It sagged half out the open gate, legs inside, torso outside, slowly sliding out. Marco panted, forehead stinging, arms shaking. "Achievement unlocked," Luis whispered shakily. "Zombie 0. Eddie snorted once, a short, hysterical puff of laughter. "Check yourselves," Marco said. "Skin, clothes." They patted down. No bites, no breaks in the tape, just sweat and bruises. Marco slid the gate shut and repinned it. "We keep going," he said. Nobody argued. They reached level 10 without seeing another one up close. They heard plenty. Distant growls. The slam of something heavy against concrete. The crack of glass somewhere below. Once, a woman's voice shrieked from an echoing stairwell, then cut off so abruptly Luis flinched like he'd been slapped. But the core itself was relatively clean. For now, the trailer on 10 sat perched on the concrete slab like a metal shoebox, generator humming quietly beside it. The door was shut. No blood around the frame. No prints. Marco raised a hand. "Luis, with me." Eddie watched the hall. Eddie nodded, planted himself at the intersection of 2 open corridors, and gripped his rebar like a bat. Marco tried the knob, unlocked. He opened it slow. The smell hit him first. The stale mix of sweat, dust, microwaved leftovers, and coffee. Normal. "Good. No zombies," Luis whispered. 10 points. "Shut up and find water," Marco said. They went through it like thieves. The water cooler still had a half-full bottle on top. Marco tipped it, feeling the weight. Heavy enough to be worth the risk. They found 3 cases of plastic bottles under the table, one already opened for the crew. A box of granola bars, half a loaf of bread in a plastic bag, peanut butter, jelly, a drawer full of instant soup packets, and random tea. "Loot room," Luis said, eyes wide. They packed fast, trying to balance greed with common sense. Too much weight, and the latter would become a death trap. Marco split the water between them. 2 bottles each on their belts. 2 more in Luis's day pack he'd left hanging on a hook. Food went in as well. He hesitated over the big cooler bottle. It would be awkward, but if they lashed it to a rope, he decided in 2 seconds. "Eddie," he called. "Still clear," came the reply. Mostly? Something's moving a few floors down. Can't see it yet. We're taking the jug." They stripped an electrical cord out of its casing and used the copper wire to lash the 5-gallon bottle, then tied the bundle to Marco's harness so it hung down his back like a blue submarine. Luis rooted in the foreman's desk and came up with a box of nails and, bizarrely, a baseball bat leaning in the corner, splintered at the handle. "Pete's softball bat," he said. "Sorry, Pete." They wrapped the bat with nails and duct tape. It looked like a prop from one of Luis's games. Eddie swung it experimentally. "Now we're talking." "Out," Marco said. They filed back into the corridor. The building groaned around them, settling. Dust drifted somewhere deeper in the core. The world outside the slab's edge looked like another planet. Smoke, strange movement, patches of people congregating and then breaking like waves. "Back up?" Eddie asked. "Back up," Marco confirmed. "Slow." They hadn't taken 2 steps before the first one found them. It came from the side, out of one of the unfinished office bays where drywall hadn't gone up yet. 1 second the opening was just shadow. The next, a body exploded out of it. Feet slipping on dust, hands clawing for purchase. It hit Eddie first. He grunted and went down hard. The bat clattered away. The thing on top of him snarled, tried to get its teeth into the side of Eddie's neck, blocked by the duct-taped collar he'd wrapped under his vest. Its jaw chomped air inches from skin. "Fuck!" Eddie bellowed. Marco didn't think. His body just moved. The jug on his back swung like a pendulum, almost overbalancing him as he charged. He slammed the pry bar down with both hands. It connected with the zombie's temple with a meaty crack. The head snapped sideways. It spasmed, but didn't stop. It turned that wrong-angled stare on him, lips slick. Luis appeared on its other side, hammer in hand, and drove the claw end into the thing's eye socket. This time, the hammer stuck. Everything stopped for 1 beat. Then the body slackened. Luis had to brace 1 boot on its shoulder to yank the hammer free. His breath came in high wheezes. "You okay?" Marco asked Eddie. "I think so." Eddie kicked the corpse off and rolled to his knees. "He's got worse breath than my uncle." Something screeched from the office bay. 3 more shapes lurched out, one after the other. A woman in business clothes, a laborer in muddy boots, and a kid no older than 19 in a sight hoodie. All 3 moved like their joints had sand in them, limbs jerking, heads wobbling. Their eyes snapped to the movement in the hall. They shrieked. "Back!" Marco barked. "Open space!" They had maybe 4 seconds before the 3 were on them. He didn't waste them. He stepped sideways, away from Eddie, forcing the corridor to narrow, funneling the lead zombie toward him instead of splitting the line. It worked. The laborer hit him first, arms out, fingers clawed. Marco let him grab the pry bar, then shoved forward, jamming the man back into the wall with its own momentum. Teeth snapped inches from his cheek. Spit hit his face shield. Luis took the woman, or tried to. She was fast, faster than she had any right to be. She ducked his hammer swing without meaning to, then rammed into his chest. They went down in a tangle. Her nails scraped at his taped hoodie, peeling duct tape up in strips. The kid went for Eddie, but Eddie grabbed the bat and swung. The nail-wrapped barrel hit the kid's jaw. Bone shattered, teeth flew. The momentum yanked the bat out of Eddie's hands, stuck in ruined flesh. The kid flopped, wriggling. Marco drove his knee into his own zombie's thigh, pinning it harder, then shifted his grip and rammed the pry bar's chisel end up under its chin, aiming for that soft spot he'd already learned. It took 2 attempts. On the second, the resistance gave way, and the body became heavy. He let it slide down the wall. Luis was still wrestling, grunting curses as the woman scrabbled at him. She managed to get fingers under his taped hood. Duct tape ripped. Her hand slipped toward bare skin. Marco lunged, grabbed the back of her blazer, and yanked hard. She came off Luis like Velcro. He swung her into the opposite wall. Her skull bounced. She kept coming. Luis didn't hesitate. He raised the hammer high over her exposed face and brought it down with a muffled crunch. For a second, the only sound was their breathing. Then somewhere below them, something else howled, answering the earlier shrieks like a chorus. Marco swallowed. That's 2 fights, Luis panted. We only planned for... What, 0? We planned for staying alive, Marco said. Check for bites. They did, hands running over duct tape, jackets, pant legs. Luis discovered new rips in the tape around his neck. The hoodie underneath had a faint dark smear where dirty nails had scraped, but no broken skin. Close, he whispered. Too close, Eddie said. Marco forced himself to look at the kid's ruined face. He might have seen him in the elevator last week, or handing out flyers in the lobby. 75% chance he'd never know. We get the supplies up and reassess, he said. Nobody argued. Getting the jug back up was pure labor. The weight dragged at Marco's harness, pulling him backward on the ladder. Every move had to be deliberate. No sudden shifts, no letting the jug pendulum. Halfway up, his shoulders began to burn. The armor layers trapped heat. Sweat ran down his spine. Luis climbed first, lighter, more agile. Eddie brought up the rear, pausing every few rungs to listen. 3 times they heard movement in the core, rapid steps circling, hitting one landing, then another. Once, a gray hand slapped at the mesh near Eddie's hip, smearing blood before the owner stumbled away again. By the time they hauled the jug onto the cabin deck and rolled it inside, Marco's arms shook so badly he could barely unclasp the lanyard. He dropped into the chair and let the tremors come. Luis tore open a bottle, drank half in one go, then forced himself to stop. He passed it to Eddie, who did the same, then handed it to Marco without comment. The water was warm and plastic-tasting. It might as well have been holy. They ate half the granola, divided the bread and peanut butter into clumsy thirds, and made a messy attempt at sandwiches on the console. Crumbs rained onto the controls. Nobody cared. After, they lay in their armor on the cabin floor, bellies no longer screaming, bodies exhausted. The fights had buzzed adrenaline into their blood. The aftermath burned it out. We should go again, Eddie said at last. Not quite a question. We just did, Luis muttered. Twice. I mean, later. There's more food, more water, maybe radios, maybe even people. The last word sat in the cabin like a live wire. Luis turned his head toward Marco. What do you think? Marco stared at the ceiling. The steel above them vibrated faintly with every gust. Outside, the city groaned and crackled and screamed in waves. We rest, he said. We watch. We see how bad it gets. Then we decide. Game logic, Luis murmured. We cleared one zone. Next zone's harder. Marco didn't know about games. He knew about fatigue, about how it made men sloppy. Sloppy killed. He set shifts again. This time he dozed during Eddie's watch. The sound of rebar scraping softly on the floor as the man rolled it between his hands. He dreamed of ladders stretching into the clouds, rungs made of bones, feet slipping, hands reaching. He woke to Luis shaking his shoulder. Movement, Luis whispered. Marco blinked grit out of his eyes and sat up. The world outside the grated window looked sharper. Afternoon light, shadow edges hard. What kind? Organized, Luis said. That got his attention. He peered between the mesh. 3 blocks away, on a rooftop, a cluster of orange vests moved in a clump. Hard hats, safety harnesses. They were alive, or at least alive enough to dodge the things that lunged at them near the roof access door. 2 men swung metal bars. One had a nail gun. The orange cluster fought their way to a big HVAC unit, and clambered on top of it, gaining 3 feet of height and a tiny bit of leverage. They were too far to help, too far to talk to, too far to do anything but watch. Luis did anyway. "We could rig a line," he muttered. "Crane to crane, like in that movie." "Too far," Marco said. "Wind would swing it. We'd end up as meat piñatas halfway. So we just leave them? We can't help them." The words scraped on the way out. Down on the street, smoke curled from a grocery store they'd passed every day for 2 months. Somebody had broken the glass. Carts lay overturned out front. Bodies flopped in the entry. Looting, Luis's game brain supplied silently. Survival, Marco's work brain countered. Food, Eddie's hungry brain supplied. "That's a lot of food down there. And a lot of them," Luis added. Marco watched a cluster of zombies slam into the grocery store's automatic doors, bouncing off the metal frame, slipping on broken glass. There had to be a dozen at the entrance alone, and more on the sidewalks, drawn by noise and movement. They had water now. Enough for a day, maybe 2 if they were careful. Food, not so much. The granola and bread would run out fast. He imagined the slow gnaw of hunger again, the way it turned your thoughts into sand. Eddie saw the decision forming and pushed it. "We got armor," he said. "We got weapons. We know they can be put down. We run a quick one. In and out. Bottled water, canned food, whatever. We stack up here and then we can sit on this crane for a week if we have to." Luis chewed his lip. Game logic says the big rewards are where the big risk is. "And what's your real people logic say?" Marco asked. Luis stared at the grocery store front a long time. "I don't want to go," he admitted. "But I don't want to starve more." Marco took a breath. He still smelled blood when he closed his eyes. He also smelled instant coffee and peanut butter and cheap construction dust and sweat, and the 3 of them alive. "Okay," he said. "One more run, before dark. Straight down, straight across, straight back. We move like ghosts. We don't get greedy. First sign of real trouble, we bail." "And if we run into trouble right off the bat?" Eddie asked. Marco thought about the ladder zombie, the hallway fight, the 3 bodies on the 10th floor. "We've already run into trouble," he said. "And we're still here." Nobody cheered, but they got up anyway. Muscles stiff, eyes pulled to the city the way iron moves to a magnet. Marco turned to the grocery entrance. At first it looked like before, a handful of them hammering at the glass, slipping on blood and broken plastic. Then more drifted in from the side streets. Then more. A slow trickle becoming a stream, the stream thickening into a tide. They didn't stop. They stacked. They piled. Every crash drew 3 more. The doors bowed. The glass spiderwebbed. A woman in a torn coat slammed into the frame and stayed there, twitching. Another climbed over her back without meaning to. Teeth, elbows, noise. The wrong kind of gravity pulling everything toward that single bright mouth of the store. "That's more than before," Luis swallowed. "Yeah," Eddie said quietly. Marco kept watching. He counted without thinking. Not numbers, but weight, motion, force lines. How many bodies it would take to block a return path. How many seconds they'd lose if one of them slipped. How far the stair tower suddenly felt from here. He imagined running into that. He imagined running back out of it. "No," Marco breathed. The word uncertain at first, just air leaving his lungs. He stayed with it a second longer. Let the picture finish forming. "No," he said again, heavier. "Let's give it a day. Observe them, see how they tick. See how they move. See what draws them, what doesn't. Plus, maybe they scatter by tomorrow." Luis sighed loudly, and Eddie nodded slowly, eyes drifting to the things below. And Marco couldn't blame him. His did too, pulled back to the chaos. The rest of the day was spent in silent busy work, and as the sun edged down behind the distant buildings, turning smoke into molten stripes. The city looked almost beautiful for one brief moment, all orange and gold and shadow. Another day, he murmured to himself, the words tasting wrong and familiar all at once. He took another sip of cold coffee, let it sit on his tongue until the bitterness seeped in, and kept his eyes on the last light. One more day. He survived this day. Tomorrow he'll decide about the next. End of part 1. You've just listened to 600 Feet Above Hell. Short story from the collapse. I post new stories twice a week, and for the next few weeks, the collapse will be pulling double duty with even more episodes. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe and hit like. If this video hits 70 likes, part 2 drops tomorrow. A new part will be released each day we hit the like goal. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.